Welcome to the Rainbow Bull with Tim Volk from T. Volk and Company Consulting. In this podcast, Tim, a proud member of the LGBTQ community, discusses a range of topics around the 5 capitals of a flourishing family: human, intellectual, social, spiritual, and financial capital. Tim will use this framework as he and his guest experts delve into the secrets of the wealthy and how we might learn from them. So let's get started on this exciting adventure together. Advisors do many things for their clients, but in unique situations, even a family office can benefit from an outside expert. An intrafamily dispute, the divorce of a son or daughter active in the family business, or a rising Gen member who is trans. Are you, as the advisor, qualified to step in? Do you want to step in? When you're asked to step in, turn to Tim. Tim Volk is ready. I'm Patrice Sikora, and Tim is here with me. And Tim, we know, look, times change, but it is no secret the wealth management industry still often fails to include and understand family members who are not white males. And frankly, This excludes a lot of very smart people.
Yeah. I think we're faced with an industry that has been populated on average with a typical white male, and for all we know, straight white male. And I think where we're seeing is that the demographics in the country are shifting. You even see it in our ads. We've talked about that before, where you see in the ads for television, the car ads, you see a black and white couple or an Asian and black couple, or, we see a mixed race couple. We've even seen 2 dads. We've even seen 2 moms, which is, in my perspective, groundbreaking from where we were when I was growing up. That never happened,
Hey, 2 years ago, it didn't happen.
No, it's been interesting to watch this evolution. And my concern is I don't think as an industry we're shifting. I don't think we're thinking about this. Some firms are. I know some groups that are really good at this, but there are very few, to be honest.
Well, if the family is not including everyone, they are losing talent. They're losing ideas. I mean, the groups that they're ignoring generally seem to be women, as you say, non-binary gay folks. And there's, hey, if you're not in agreement politically, we were just having this conversation before.
Right.
Wow, you're on the outs.
There's a lot of things going on in families today that are taking what I'll say the alignment and really straining that alignment or the communication within the family. And I think there's kind of 2 buckets to think about right now. Well, there's the bucket that I work with, which are the advisors around the family, and there's the bucket of the family members themselves. The people that work around the family, and if you're working, like we've just talked about, the fortunate few that have enormous amount of wealth, they require a lot of people around them to manage that business. So you're really managing the business of the family. And they have outside the family a lot of people that are hired and paid to do that. So we have advisors that are working directly for the families, and they're working on lots of different areas of expertise. They could be working on investments. It's the most common people think about. Remember the 5 capitals. People always think about the financial capital first. We think about estate planning. We think about accounting, because everybody's always worried about their taxes and cash flow. You have a group of people that also worry about risk. So you have some people that are specialized in insurance, risk management. Then you have watercraft, aircraft, houses, travel, all the logistics that go with that. You may have staff. You may have people that work for you in the homes. So there's a lot of people around that have to make that happen. But also people that have, there's people with an enormous amount of money that don't have a family office. They work with advisors in well-known wealth management firms. And most of those firms, I think that if you look at the advisors, there's some that are really trying to adapt. You see more women. We are seeing more people of color than there were before. But the bulk still, Patrice, is the white male.
Right.
We do see more women, which is really helpful. And I know a lot of younger people in the industry that are representative of other people, that they represent other cultures and backgrounds. But those are sort of the 2 buckets I think about: the family on one side, and then we think about the people that work for the family in some capacity.
But now the advisor, you were talking about how new people are coming in.
Yep.
However, it still comes back to the fact that the advisor is probably in the employ of the senior generation of the family.
Right. Well,
That's
that's the
that's
other thing. And I think you heard, did Jill Shipley talk about that? And also, I think we had Covey talked about it with
Mhm,
Kirsten, that
mhm.
what she's realizing is that as an industry, we're hired by the senior generations. Typically, we're engaged by the family members that are running the money or controlling everything, not necessarily the rising gen or the kids or the grandkids. And yet, to connect to those and relate to them is a challenge.
Is it the
And
advisor's role to connect with them?
I think that most advisors that I know would want to connect with them, right? Because they're very smart
Mhm.
people. They want to preserve the relationship. They want to, and then some people will just believe that they're automatically doing that because they're doing a good job for the family. So I think that one of the missteps is not being aware of where you might not fit in or may not be doing what you think you're doing to help the family. They may not perceive your involvement the same way you would see it as an advisor. And it could be because the senior members that you've worked with for many years thinks everything's great.
Mhm.
If you were my advisor for 30 years and we meet every quarter, I'm going to say, I'm going to meet Patrice today. We're going to go through things. We'll meet for 3 or 4 hours. We'll have lunch. Maybe we do it late in the afternoon. We have a cocktail. I don't know. It just depends. But there's sort of a rhythm to it. And we don't always think, well, have we invited the other family members? And I, one of my friends even said the other day when she was talking to a group and asked if they were speaking to the women in the same capacity that they were speaking to the men. And they said, well, of course we are, but they don't always show up. They don't always want to come to the meetings. And she's like, well, do you invite them? Well, no, I don't. It's not my job. I have to, if they want to come, they want to come. And I was like,
Mhm. Now, if an advisor is asked by senior members to step in a situation and doesn't feel comfortable, they want to come to you. Why
yeah.
should they come to you?
Well, I think a lot of times I've been brought in because either one, they don't feel comfortable with the topic. They don't have time in their schedule right now to do it because they're paid to do a certain job and they're doing that job, but they're being asked now to do things that are what I would call out of scope.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is that the other thing is that they don't want to risk the relationship of what they have. So if they're managing a lot of money and the family's asking them to run a family meeting and they're not comfortable running a family meeting or talking to the family about setting up a family council or creating structure or governance on how the family can work together as they bring more family members together and to help understand the success and the money in the family. Um, they would call me and ask me to help them because they either one don't want to mess it up or two they don't have the capacity to do it. And depending on the family, I may bring in other people to help me. It may not just be me, but depending on I've worked with quite a few people and collaborate with them who are experts as well in the field like I am.
Talk
Well, I
about
don't know if I'm an expert. Doesn't that sound? I don't like it
no,
when
it
I
doesn't
say
sound so.
that.
You are an expert, and that's what I'm going to
Wow.
ask you about right now.
Uh-oh.
Why are you an expert? What makes you an expert?
I'm old.
Hey,
I
nothing wrong
don't
with
know.
that, my friend.
I don't know. I think that because you don't think of yourself as having been doing this for a long time. And I think what happens is because I speak first person coming from a family business, and I understand, particularly working with families that have family businesses, that there's a lot of people around the family that are yes people. They're going to tell them all whatever they want to hear. And I think sometimes you have to stop and say, I need someone that's going to tell me the real truth. And I have a lot of principles that say, Tim, what are you really thinking? Tell me what you're thinking. And I have to say, if I tell you what I'm thinking, you may fire me. But the truth is, when I tell them, like, I had one client that just went on and on and on, and I sat there, and one of my colleagues was with me, and I could see the colleague's eyes roll back. Like I just thought, oh no. And he just turned to me and said, Tim, and I looked at the principal, and the principal says, well, yeah, you're so damn quiet, Volk. What do you think? What do you think? Tell me what you think. And I'm like, well, I'm going to have to disagree with you. Strongly disagree. As a matter of fact, I'm going to call bullshit. And he's like, you're right. Like, it's true. It's all true.
Whoa. Let me
And I
guess.
think,
Was he an old white guy?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, was. But with families, it's also the kids, the nieces, the nephews. It gets to be a very mixed bag, and the relationships are some people get along better than others in the family. And there are family members that really lead the family. They're like what I call the cheerleaders for the family. They're the ones that help put everything together and get you to go to do things. They help put the parties on or the events on. And sometimes you're annoyed at them because they're calling like, Tim, are you gonna bring the tuna casserole, or are you gonna bring whatever? But at the end of the day, they're a really important part of the family's coming together to gather and convene. And when families convene, it's important because then they communicate and they get to know each other. Um,
And you're coming at this from, as you said, the first person
mhm.
perspective.
I think when I speak from the first person, I have spent many, many years in this business in various forms of financial services. My family, I grew up in the financial services world, so we were advising clients, from the beginning of my career. And I always felt like the honesty was one of the most important characters. Be honest with people and tell them what's really happening. Because my dad used to say, it's better to do a quick no than a fast than a long maybe.
Mhm.
And I think the families appreciate that I can come from that perspective. And then I grew up in um, financial services. Then I went on to have a career in banking and wealth management, and so I speak from it from a knowledge point. I'm a technical expert, but have what did you say, a high EQ?
We'll get to EQ. We'll get to EQ.
Well, I won't talk about that now.
In a minute. I just want to focus on the fact that you're coming at this from the first
Yeah,
person perspective,
yeah,
and you've dealt with senior members of your own family and junior members of your own family.
yeah.
You know the dynamics, you know what they can be like. How do you go into a situation and size it up?
One of the best things I think to do is to have two of us, a colleague and I, we've done assessments for families. And if the family's large, or, even if they're not large, it's very good to sit down with each of the family members and kind of assess where they're at with whatever the topic is. It's not uncommon in wealth management that as the family's generations rise, that those family members are partaking or have an interest in shared assets. So whether they have an ownership in the business, they have ownership in other things. A lot of times it's just real estate, or stock, or things that they own together. They're part of a company or an entity. So we have to come together and find out how everybody feels about that. Like, what do you think about it, Patrice? Like, do you like it? Do you like what's going on? Do you feel like you've got a voice? And if you were to say something today, what would that be? What would you like to be heard? What is it that keeps you up at night? So we ask the same set of questions across the board with all the family members. And then sometimes the family wants us to include key advisors that interact with the family every day.
Mhm.
Because they have great insights. I mean, they typically really like the family they work for, and they're passionate about it, and they want to take care of them. So they have good things good ways to think about things. And they may say, we think Patrice is withdrawn ever since of the death of her aunt, or, one of the sisters. So I think that assessment work through interview process, and it's in person typically. Sometimes we do it on Zoom, but it works really, really well. And that gives us a place to start at.
Do you find discrimination?
I think I find a lack of inclusion. I
Ah.
don't like the word discrimination per se. I think that in my personal life as a gay man, I have had overt, direct discrimination, and I've had subtle, not direct discrimination. But as I look at it today, I'm wondering if it's just maybe we don't have a sense of inclusion. And so therefore, if people that don't feel like they're part of their clan,
Hmm.
then they discard that. They like push you aside, like I'm not interested in that. That's not going to be good for us. So I guess it could be discrimination, but that's the corporate side of me always coming out. Like
That's okay.
inclusion's a softer thing to say, but
But
with
it says the same thing, really, when you come right down to it. You're like,
mhm,
that. It's a
mhm,
softer way. But again, I go back to what I said in the
yeah.
beginning, that if they don't include all members, they're losing talent. They're losing ideas there. How do you try and resolve that? Is it up to you to resolve that?
Well, families, and we've talked about this, families have been dealing with inclusion forever because the family members marry, bring new members in.
Mhm.
They're the in-law and outlaw, right? Um, Businesses, the advisors themselves, I think there's a push recently with DEI that people want to push this, idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think it gets sort of a misstep because I think that that's really good for businesses to think about inclusion because so the advisor role in the firm that they're working with, whether it's the family's firm or whether it's a independent firm to the family, it's important they think about inclusion because the families are dealing with it. And if the firm has the ability to start to think that way, then it's a mindset, right? Like you're prepared for that client situation that you may not have ever thought would come your way. And I have a saying that I like to use, what we don't know until we need to know it. And it's
So
so true
true.
in life, right? Like, and we all think we're great. We've educated, we've got all these years behind us. Then every now and then you're like, whoa, didn't see that coming. Did
Really?
not see that coming. And I find it interesting today that I've had people call me with the podcast. They've heard the podcast and they have nice things to say. But people in my past that have called to say, Tim, I just want to tell you thank you for your voice. Um, you may not know this, but I have a trans son or trans daughter or gay son or lesbian daughter or non-binary child. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate. I never thought about it could be me and I'm faced with it. And I worry about their life. I worry about their safety in today's world. And so in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, was the advisor ready for that? Is the advisor thinking that that might be a call you get someday? And then how do you react?
And this brings me to the EQ question, the emotional intelligence. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yes, you. Thanks so much for listening to the Rainbow Bull. We hope you're enjoying it so far. And if you have any questions or would like to talk more about this topic, you can find us at www.tvolco.com. And all our social media platforms are listed in the show notes. Do you think many advisors may be lacking in emotional intelligence, or are they afraid to use it?
Well, I have a great respect for the advisor community because we most of the advisors I know work really hard and they work
Mhm.
very hard for the families, but they're very focused on a specific thing they do, right? And they may be the best estate planning attorney, they may be the best investment advisor, management manager of money, but they may not have any EQ. They may just be clueless as to what's going on around them. And we all know people like this.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
They just they don't read the room. Again, I'm trying to say it in a nice way. Like they walk in and you're gonna go, what are you thinking? Have you lost your mind? You didn't you notice that people are mourning and crying here and you walk in with a party hat on and a party, what are you nuts? So yeah, I think that there's a portion of the community that is not prepared because they just don't have that skill set. And they need to recognize they don't have that skill set. Many of them do. Many will call me and say, I need you to do, that touchy feely thing, like talk to the family. I'm like, oh my God. You did come from the investment banking world, right? And they're like, yeah, and I don't understand this. The family's thinking, I told them this was a good decision. I told them it was the best thing to do. And yet they're thinking about it. I said, yeah, every decision's emotional and every decision has a taxable consequence. And they're like, oh, yeah, there's that. But it's a good investment. You should do it.
There's that.
But I'm like, well, why are they doing it? I don't know. There's a fight going on. Somebody's not getting along with somebody. And, can you just call them? I'm like, okay, well, we need a little more
Yeah.
background than that. But yeah, I think the EQ piece is you either have it or you don't. But I do think as an advisor, I think you can be prepared for some of it, kind of open your eyes and open your mind. The idea of having the beginner's mind, always willing to learn, always wanting to learn, always wanting to see something different. How would you describe EQ?
I think it's the perfect example was walking into, say, a funeral home with a party hat on. Yeah. Unless you really knew the deceased. Maybe the deceased would have loved it. Who knows? But I think that's a very appropriate just
one of my friends is she was holding the funeral for her mother who had died in March. And we could have the funeral and the memorial service and the burial until May because the ground in upstate New York where she wanted to be buried wouldn't be unthawed enough to do it. So we walk into the funeral home and the casket's open and all the party I'm with go to the left and they walk to the back and I walk up to the casket because I see the daughter and I'm walking up to this friend of ours and I'm a little surprised the casket's open because she would have been horrified to know that was up. But so then her daughter grabs my arm and we walk up to see her and I said, how you doing? And she says, I'm just so upset. I'm just so upset. I can't even tell you, Tim. It's just been so difficult. I'm so sad, so upset about something. I'm like, well, it's understandable. This is, she was a great friend. She was a wonderful mom. And she's, no, not about that. But just look how she looks terrible. I lost
it.
That's, and she was a little out there. And of course, my husband sees me across the room laughing.
Oh no!
In the funeral home. Because I lost it. I just started laughing because I'm like, oh my God. And then she says, well, she's been dead for 2 months. What am I going to do? And I'm like, oh my God.
Well, she said it to you though. So there was some restraint there, constraint and restraint.
But again, she was like clueless as to what we were and what we were doing. And
well, when you walk into a situation like that, if it is within within a family issue, and you're seeing so much emotion that isn't quite right, and how long does it take you to get your hands around it and to find a way to bring people together?
Good question. I think one of the things through the interview process, in what we call the assessment and interview and assessment process, you can start to see common things. And so we want to talk about the common things. We want to talk about the good things. We want to sort of find the way to bind the family. What are the things that are like? Where do we think similar? Where do we have some shared values, which typically the families do because that's just the way they are. The families are raised that way and they have shared values. Sometimes it takes a few months and then I really had fortunate to have some good things happen. And there are times when there's the families are sort of stuck in their position, and then we have to come up with options as to how they want to move forward. But it's always endearing to me when certain family members say, well, we don't want to leave these people hanging. So we'll figure out a way to help them. Maybe you could help us figure out a way to do that without us directly doing it or appearing to be in a, because a lot of times people push back if they feel like there's control, like if you're trying to control somebody or you're trying to tell them what to do. It's not different than any of us. We don't like to be told what to do.
Well, then let's talk about the advisors who can bring you in. Why is this good for them?
I like to think of it as 3 or 4 things. One is it's good for business. because it's good for business to think in terms of, particularly on inclusion, how do we help the advisors prepare or address the unheard voices, or the what I'll see, people that are feeling marginalized. And they may not be marginalized perception wise by others, but they feel marginalized. And sometimes it's the quiet one. And they're just quiet. They're introverted, and you might be around a lot of extroverted. Like in our family, we have quite a few extroverts, and then there's a few introverts, and they sort of sit on the sidelines. I think the other piece is that it's good for the clients to be prepared to be able to help the client and to be able to develop new clients that are different. Maybe you haven't thought about being more comfortable serving women. Maybe you haven't thought about that. That you grew up in a very Italian neighborhood in New York, and so you feel very comfortable serving the Italian community, but you've noticed that there's a lot of older women that are widows or divorced. Maybe that's a target market that you should be actually, because you come from that community, you understand that community, and if you just change the way you think, maybe you could be a great guidance for them. And then the other piece is, for firms that are growing and they need talent, I think that you're going to attract new people, maybe even retain people that feel like this is a great environment. And I actually know of a few firms that are really good at attracting a diverse talent pool, and they include a lot of different people, and it's really powerful. And it's fun to sit in the room and say, "Oh my God, look at all these people around the table. They look more like me, or they look more like, the world we live in."
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I'm not stopping you. Keep going.
Well, I think that being able to retain families, if you think about the natural nature of a family and they're going to grow, being prepared to offer additional things for the family, or being able to have other people around you that can talk to the rising generation. If you're very tight with mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, then it's not likely that the rising gen, the children or the grandchildren, are going to look to you and trust you totally, because they're going to know that you're always working in the interest of mom and dad.
But if you show that younger generation that those interests of mom and dad are their interests as well.
Yes. Or that they've brought in other people that can communicate with you at your level, not at your level, but more relatable.
On the same frequency.
On the same frequency, or that are engaged for you.
There you go.
Not engaged for me as the dad, or me as the mom, or me as the grandma and grandpa, whatever. Or grandma, or, what. I'm not trying to be stereotypical. There can be, other people, but my experience has been that this rising gen, which are the next generation or the subsequent generation, are a little distrustful. It's just something happening in the way our society is right now. So I think we have to be prepared to figure out how to give them a voice, get them to talk, invite them to the table, get them to listen. Around everybody at the table has to listen to them. And then that will bring out more information to the family as to what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it in philanthropy. Philanthropy is a great example, because so much of the philanthropy was dictated by the people that either created the foundation or that started the great philanthropy. Like, if our relationship, let's just say my family was we had a great relationship with the museum, and it's the Modern Art Museum. And so my grandparents love modern art, let's say. And so we've kept that going. But let's say the rising generation maybe has a passion on in the environment, or water, or preserving wildlife on the river that's close to the main house that they grew up by, or the ocean they grew up by. And so are we as a family willing to say, okay, well, what would you like to be responsible for in that charitable effort? Have you gone out and looked at the charitable organizations that you want to support? Have you researched them? Have you given some of your own money, or more importantly, have you spent any time with them? And if we're willing to make a gift as a family, are you willing to be responsible to make sure that's executed the way we as a family want it to be or expect it to be? And are you willing to help? To me, that also gives empowering to that group. I think of a family that I just adored, this one family that I had the great pleasure of working with, and they had a foundation, and I think that they had done so much good in the world. And when we asked if they had ever put together a summary of all the money they gave away and where they gave it, they said no. And they said, why would we do that? I said, because maybe you should share that with your children and the grandchildren and potentially the great grandchildren you have. And when they did that, the family was in shock, because over 35 years, you can have, or 30 years, or they couldn't go back to the inception with the records, but they could go back a pretty long time. And they were impressed with how many different things the family had touched. And I were, whether that was the brick on the wall by the fountain in the park, or the tree that was planted that's now this big tree, or a bench that was somewhere, or maybe you supported the arts or the music or the schools that they went to. And all of a sudden that there's a whole different perspective on the family that they didn't know. They didn't know this family history. That's kind of cool.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
So I think sometimes, and I have a wonderful set of colleagues that are very successful advisors to families, and they go out of their way to help the families. But there's only so much time in the day. There's only so many days in the week, in the month, and they can't do more than what they're doing sometimes. And so they ask others to come in and help them. And I'm one of those people that is fortunate to get asked.
You like it?
I like it. I just think that in my career, it's somewhat odd. I always feel like the imposter in the room, because I grew up with technical training, and I was very good. I liked some of the technical things and the businesses that I helped to run. And when you walk into a family, the whole saying is, when you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. Because it's family. It's all different. There are common themes and there are some similar challenges the families are facing, but the way they deal with it are individual to that particular family. And the advisors have to adapt to it. And sometimes the advisors are caught. They're caught because they've been engaged by one part of the family. And that's really their client. And if you're talking to attorneys, they're really worried about it. Like, who is their client? Who is the fiduciary? Who is that attorney-client privilege?
How can an advisor reach you? Just to talk, maybe, or to call you in?
Email me at tim.volk@tvolco.com. I really appreciate when sometimes it's just best to talk about what they're trying to do. And if I can't help them, I may know the right people to connect them to. I don't mean to sound like I'm a catch-all to everybody. There are areas that I feel very comfortable in. I have a technical background in wealth management, real estate, insurance, and banking. And so I spent a lot of my time in my career in that. I have a great understanding of it. I was asked by clients to step into the more human issues that surround wealth because of my coming from the family enterprise, being able to understand and relate to the family members. And if I can provide that insight to the advisors I work with, I want to help them, because many of them, although they have the greatest intent and they're trying very hard to do it, they can't bridge that gap to really understand what's going on in the client's mind. And I hope I can help them with that.
Well, advisors, there's your invitation. Get in touch with Tim. Turn to Tim. You got a situation, a question, just a topic you want to discuss? Turn to Tim. And follow or subscribe to this podcast, too, while you share it with others. I'm Patrice Sikora with Tim Volk, and thanks for being with us. Thank you for listening to the Rainbow Bull Podcast. Visit our website at www.tvolco.com or give us a call at 312-636-5855. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of T. Volk and Company Consulting. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.